Actually, Daniel, this is probably the one you posted. How are future neoliberal colors created through this education system? I think this is a really good question.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just curious. I don't know, so I just put it down.
Well, should we define what neoliberal is? Because I feel like that word gets thrown out around a lot, and I mean, I googled it and I understand the definition, but I'm kind of curious, like what does that mean for everybody?
Yeah, I think for me, it's basically a modern day self-imposed democrat, right? People who identify with the party, the Democratic Party, and hold those values, which socially they seem right, and they seem to be the right thing to say. So if you go to like a Harvard University and you say the right things, you're right. You're speaking in terms of justice. You're speaking in terms of the things that so-called help society. For example, let's say the Peace Corps or Kennedy liberals, right? The sort of liberal you're supposed to be. But what it never does is you're not supposed to talk against like institutions of power. You're not supposed to talk about maybe the military is illegitimate. Maybe the funding is not that great, that we give it so much. So in terms of neoliberal, it's your Princeton grad who did like ethnic studies and he's white and he says everything right. He says all the right things. It's like, how do you know how to say all those things without even like a bat of an eye? It's like you're almost sociopathic in that way, but like you say all the right things, you do the right things. And yet there's this other, I don't know what to call it. You're not willing to budge on that aspect of power and give it to the people. That sort of right-wing, left-wing divide in my sense, like you either believe in the people to have direct democracy or you're very much against democracy. And you can sort of like feel that divide within whatever you think. And there are certain people who like philosopher kings. There are people who like the monarchy, that like the enlightened to lead, and they assume beneficence, so and then there are other people who are like, no, fuck that, we're just fucking organized, we'll do it.
The struggle.
Yeah,
I was trying to find this book that I haven't read, but I heard of it, and it reminded exactly what you were saying. It was talking about like the nonprofit industrial complex, right? How we like fund all of these things that are supposed to be like for justice and equality, but really like we're funding just enough to like hand out a few things, but we're not truly funding any like foundational change, because that would be problematic, right?
Right.
And a lot of times the people who are funding these things are benefiting from the systems that are in place. So, and obviously they're not going to fund like the demise of their own, the reason why they have so much damn money to give away and need these tax write-offs. That's been such an internal conflict for me working at a charter school, because I think I see that a lot at the school that I'm currently at. It's like the charter school reform movement touts itself as like the revolution and trying to help underprivileged students and the gap and the divide, and they're closing and mending all that crap. And in reality, a lot of the really big players in charter school reform, like BES and all of the people that are funding it, are of course funding it with strings. And a lot of those strings are like, students need to have high test scores. And in order to do that, you need to do a lot of drill and kill. And in order to do a lot of drill and kill, it comes with a certain like behavioral expectation. And we fall back into this, like, you want to push the boundary and you want to be like a little woke, but not too woke. You still kind of have to fall in line, literally, right? At some of these schools, it's like you have to learn all of these ways to behave. Sit down correctly, sit up straight, don't do this, don't do that. When you speak, use this sentence frame. And you get kind of trained on all of these behavioral things, while at the same time being told that, you went to a school that prepares you to engage with the world for more. And that is how our schools are creating that, because we're teaching our students that we're teaching them about reform a lot of times and not revolution, which we all know is like vastly different. And we're still feeding them the college dream. We're still telling them that is the only way to succeed, and that they have to, and not only that, but that they need to be competitive, right? Not any school is going to be good enough. You need to go to these certain schools. Which I'm starting to see a little bit of the break in that culture, but it's for sure going to take some years.
Yeah, that kind of neoliberal.
Yeah.
I always thought neoliberal went more in hand with imperialism. That's usually the context in which I've always heard the term. It's like Zionism is neoliberalism, or gold refinements, or like precious metal, like precious metal mines in Africa. Those are like results of neoliberalism, and I don't know, the influence of external governments. But yeah, I'm not really familiar with neoliberalism in terms of like domestic policy.
Yeah, I always thought like neoliberalism was one of those words that was used a lot during the first Iraq War, the second Iraq War, when everybody was like, all these like people in the Bush administration are neoliberals, and I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Because I was like, I still didn't understand what that word meant.
Yeah.
But I think I think like there's that, that one shirt that was like really popular like 20 years ago, and it had like those planes, like it was a black and white shirt, and it had those planes like bombing people, and it says "Democracy We Deliver." That shirt is the thing that embodies neoliberalism to me. It's like this, like exporting of capitalism, and like that, and globalization and all that. And so it's kind of like this, like we believe in the liberal ideal that people should be like represented in government. So, and also at the same time, we also believe in this thing called capitalism and institutions, and we're going to export that and impose that on other people. In schools, it looks like kind of like what Rebecca was saying. Kids should just do well in tests, and they should just sit up this way and talk this way, use these sentence frames. If they go to college, they're going to live a good life. And it's like this really interesting ideology that like a lot of our students' parents are actually all about believing in. Like they all want their kids to go to college and stuff. Like they don't want revolution. They just want like more for themselves, which is also really problematic to, I think, most educators. Because I think a lot of educators are like they go in with this idea of like revolution, but then they're just like, yeah, we're just sending our kids to like the CSUs. Awesome. There's no revolution there. Anyways, that was kind of what I was thinking of.
I see. So college, and the whole education system is what develops that kind of
yeah. Go to college and major in like criminal justice or something.
Right. Or business.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was naive to ask the question, but it does speak to some like more terrible truth, which is a lot of my students from Los Angeles from many years back are now getting in contact with me, and I've been finding out that they've all dropped their majors several times, of course, and now a huge percentage of them are going to major in business. They have decided that is going to be the route in which they can get what they want in that way.
By majoring in the most boring thing possible.
Right. They're going to have to learn to play some golf. But, part of me, of course, it goes back to that part of the conversation. We can love people despite their political difference to us. And of course, if you love somebody and they say, look, I'm advancing in my education, and I'm really proud of myself, and my family is proud of me, and I never thought I could do better than this in school, so I'm going to major in business, and I'm going to win it big. And I just think to myself, you fucking neoliberal. And I feel bad about it, right? I'm like, all right, excellent. So at the end of all of this, you're like, and so that for me that's that line. From a teacher standpoint, it's like, okay, so your aim is going to be to make money. Legally, that's going to be your aim.
Yeah, but Daniel, that's okay though, right? Like,
oh yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, their kids are going to be the artists that are going to be the revolutionaries. I'm okay with that.
Because if you actually think about it, that is the truth to them, which is like, hey, everybody, there's this fucked up game being played. And here are your routes, here are your probabilities, and the ones that like figure it out, they're like, nah, this is the way, let's make it happen. But then I'm curious about something that I don't have any knowledge about, but a lot of my students are also handling this way. They're trying to become radiology technologists and medical technicians, because it's cheap and they're starting to pay like 8,000 with health insurance with very flexible hours, and there's a shortage in California. So like some people have figured out that game, and they're like, fuck it, look, here's what I need to do. I'm gonna study for this test, and they'll make as much as I do now. These motherfuckers. And so like I'm wondering like what is driving people this way, just really towards money, if that's the real goal, versus like business, and they're like, well, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna get the new idea.
I mean, I think no, go ahead, Jared.
I was just saying that I think a lot of folks who, kind of like what Rebecca was saying earlier, like once you get past that survival stage, you can start thinking about the big ideas. And I think that like a lot of folks who harbor like ideas about altering society or wanting to change things for the better, they have a little bit of privilege behind them, right? Mm-hmm. Even Karl Marx was an asshole, right? Like he wasn't a poor dude. Like he was just he was poor by choice when he was older, right? Uh-huh. Like he went to law school and kicked ass and just got into fights and got drunk all the time, right? Like he had the privilege to do that, right? And then he chose to be poor as an adult and be a shitty father. But like even the most, like a lot of these like revolutionary folks, like in their personal lives have a little bit of privilege behind them.
Yeah, Che Guevara
right?
too.
Yeah, he was like dude, that guy was like, he's part of the California Peralta legacy. Right, like his great grandfather is like the dude that like was one of the biggest landowners in California prior to statehood. So like I don't know, it just seems to me that like there is like, I think in education there's like this kind of like you have to take a generational standpoint. Like if our kids are running around like wanting to be boring ass business majors, yeah, I'm not going to be hanging out with you, when you're an adult. I find you boring, but your kids might be interesting, right? Like,
right.
I don't know. That's the way I see it. Like half my students, I don't want to talk to them as adults. I know they're going to be boring. The other half, I know they're going to be great to hang out with and have a beer with. And for those who are boring, their kids are going to be awesome. And so
you'll babysit.
I would love to babysit. I think that would be awesome, right? Like, the thing is, like, I think there's a generational, like, I think change is always going to be generational. It takes a couple of generations, like 50 to 100 years to like create like a generation of people who think about questioning existing structures. So I don't blame kids for wanting to be like right-wing morons. But, or at least adopting like super problematic beliefs about upholding like, or at least surviving in these institutions. Like, it's like, that's where you're at. That's cool, whatever. But, will I want to have a beer with you? Probably not, like that's kind of the way I see it. Not that I'm like I don't want to make myself as like a shitty educator or like a really terrible person, but like some people I find interesting and some people I find boring. The people that are boring, you got to give them time, right? Like maybe they might be really cool later on in life, but it just takes some time. And I think like everybody has to like get to that stage where they start questioning things. And that's when I think really interesting stuff happens.
Right. No, I do remain hopeful, and I hate to bring a top neoliberal into the conversation, but I remember watching Hillary Clinton a lot during the election, and I would follow her like obsessively. I would like study what she said. I would like take notes, and I would dream about Hillary in her suits. And what I remember is that I could never get a sense if this person believed any of the things that she said. Like there was no conviction behind anything based on her record and all that. And when she did interviews, I knew that I know she's a Clinton. I know she's smart. Of course she's smart. She must understand. She has the will of logic behind her. And people would ask her questions about the economy, like, Mrs. Clinton, don't you think that we should, provide more economic strictures to control the way in which businesses do operations? And there was this moment, always those moments where she knows better. She knows what the moral line is, but she has to say the party message. And I like that moment because otherwise she'd be a sociopath. And that moment gives me the hope because it's like, Mrs. Clinton, I know you know better. And if you didn't have to worry about your fucking money so much, you would act that way if everybody was the same or a little bit more the same. So
you just said it, and that's probably why the kids are going to fucking major in business, right? Because they know better, but they have to worry about. Plus, that is also still the message we send in schools. Like we equate college with money, right? It's a stupid thing that the counselor always tells the kid, like, don't you want a house and a car? It's like, no, like when very seldom have I met educators or counselors or school admin that tell kids, like, let's figure out what you're really passionate about. It's like, no, well, yeah, you want to like it, but you also want to go into a field that's like sustainable. And that's, the minute you hear kids want to major in English or history, it's like, oh, well, what are you going to do with that?
Right. It's like, what's wrong with you?
So
Somebody
it's like
put drugs
we
into your
feed
brain?
into this notion that education equates money. And now that we're seeing college graduates without jobs, then people are mad, right? Like, fucking teachers, they lied. Like, you can go to college and you have all these people like, I make 6 figures and I didn't go to college, right? And then you're like, oh my gosh, why are we even having this conversation? Like, it's not just about money, but I think like we've played a part in that role too, of equating that education means financial like gain or stability, and it's a messed up combination in my opinion.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I haven't met any administrators or counselors that don't have that viewpoint,
It's the worst.
Like, I can't even think of one, actually. I mean, other than you, Rebecca. I don't know if you consider yourself an administrator, but...
Yeah, I like to tell all my students just to major in accounting or major in things. If they even want to go to college, major in the things that no one else wants to do, because that's where the money's at. But if you don't want to do that, then you got to figure something else out. Because like I don't know, man, it's going to be hard being a person of color as an English major competing against a whole bunch of white ladies. That's going to be really hard. That's all I got to say.
Oh yeah, I know someone like that. Well,
I'm over here like, be that person, be that only one brown person, go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Show them white ladies like your English skills.
We're setting them up to struggle, but
yeah.
You know what though? I just for the knowledge, I just want to know, like, tell us what do they talk about?
Are you still talking about Hillary?
Talking about all of them now.
Oh, hey, can I, since this is like a recorded podcast, can I tell you, can I have at least like one prediction, like a conspiracy theory prediction?
Go for it.
Okay.
May 23rd, 2020, 4:28 p.m. Go.
Okay, here we go.
47 seconds.
I think Chelsea Clinton's kids are going to overthrow the U.S. government or be like amazing revolutionaries.
And you'd have a beer with them.
That's a person I could have a beer with. Not Chelsea, though. She went to Stanford and it's probably boring.
Okay.
So.
Okay, let the record show.
Yeah, well, let's see if that happens. That's you heard it here first time. I was gonna say, I mean, Rebecca, you and I know this. A lot of our students that even end up going to these universities or colleges, even the ones that are top at our school, like academically, they struggle so much. And some of them have stopped attending schools and just became disillusioned and, are just now working.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I don't know. It's like we're setting them up to this routine that's supposedly going to help them in college or these institutions. But, they're not equipped to have that, like, once they get there, it's I don't know. And then once they stop going, they just, their self-esteem goes downhill because they're like, I was really smart back then. Like, what the hell happened? And now I can't even, pass this class in this college. And it does, psychological damage.
Yeah, I mean, recently I've been contacting a bunch of former grads from years prior to give some advice for this year's graduating class. And I think I've talked to about 28 kids now. And the common message is that, and this is a pretty large range of like academic, like prestige and similar backgrounds economically and culturally. They said like the content actually, like whatever that thing is that they're supposed to study, not that hard. Like they can keep up. These are even immigrants who's, recent to the country. These are people who grew up poor, whatever the thing is. They're like, I could do the work, but they're not able to just do the work because they have to get rid of or take care of their finances. They have other things going on. But for the kids that I know that they don't have to worry about like rent or food. They're able to make it. And I think that sort of speaks to something about America. Like recently I saw this clip of Conan O'Brien being interviewed and somebody was grilling him saying like, you went to Harvard, right? And you thought that you were not that great and you were worried. Was it like actually that hard? Like, was it much more difficult than what your friends at other universities saying? He's like, to be honest, no. And I think that's the secret of this country. Like you actually get to those high levels and you realize everybody's bullshitting. Like there's a very small percentage of people who know what the fuck they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Very small percentage. Everybody else is, it's not what we think it is. And so it's this weird mind game. And the kids that like just are like, look, I'll fucking do it. They make it. And whatever they decide to study, business or whatever.
I had a professor, I did my undergrad at Cal State Fullerton, and I had a history professor who gave us a speech that I'll still remember to this day. I consider it my graduation speech, and it was maybe like my second year in, but he was lecturing and then just kind of went on this tangent and talked about how he has taught like across the nation, right? He was like the leading expert on Abraham Lincoln. So he's like lectured across the country at Yale, at Harvard, Princeton. And he said like, one of the things I've been able to see is just like what different students are afforded in their education. And he was talking about how in his experience, the state level schools in all of the states have presented him with some of the most like academically hardworking students he's ever met, right? So he's like, at Cal States and at other state schools, when I've been there for a while, he's like, my office hours are used. Like people are coming for the help, for the support, they're caring. He's like, versus at like a lot of prestigious schools that I've been at, people just turn things in, and sometimes they turn in crap and they're like surprised that they're getting, you know, commentary back, or that they're not getting a certain grade. They're outraged by it. But yeah, that was interesting for him to say that, you know, that he really enjoys teaching at that level because he just enjoys being around students who generally just seem to really engage and want to work at the academic piece more.
Right. That's really cool.
There's an article about how moderate teachers like perpetuate educational oppression. I thought that was kind of interesting. There were some quotes that just kind of want to share. And I don't know, I just want to see what your thoughts on. It says like the moderate teacher has been so thoroughly institutionalized by schooling that they perpetuate the institution onto their students. The moderate teacher can often speak the lingo of racial ideology and theory, but weaponizes it against students to continue to make them simply and become citizens of a standardized capitalist society. And I know the author also mentions like U.S. schooling is also a process of dehumanization. And I, as a teacher, am complicit in that dehumanization. That's why many people, especially people of color, talk about the unlearning they have to do as adults in order to learn about themselves, their culture, and feel closer to their own humanity.
Well, I think that definitely, I mean, I don't know how true that is in general, but there's definitely cases where that is true. Like if you think of like boarding schools at native reservations, those were totally like school and education were totally like instruments of evil in those cases, right? The students were completely dehumanized, kids were abused, and they were taken away from their families. So that's definitely an example where education performed that evil role. I learned something interesting when I visited Easter Island one time. So Easter Island is a Polynesian island, part of like the Polynesian culture. They speak the Polynesian language there, and I learned that in attempting to implement more, so natives there, like native educators there, they were very interested in combining more indigenous education in like the local public schooling. And that including more of the Rapa Nui language, their native language there. That's difficult. They found out that was difficult because the Chilean government or the educational system there, they have to meet like certain like quotas, right? They have like students have to be at a certain reading level and like communication level in Spanish. And if you want to implement more education in a different language, that competes with the Spanish language, right? The Spanish language, which is the national language. There's probably many ideological reasons for wanting for the Chile, the country of Chile, to sort of homogenize these Rapa Nui students more into becoming like more Hispanic. But like regardless of like aside from that, like it's difficult to implement more indigenous education into public education, right? Because like if your money as an educator, if your money's coming from like the state, you kind of have to do what the state does, right? And what they want to do. And it's difficult to cater to locals, right? So that's definitely something I've noticed with indigenous communities. It's definitely a struggle to incorporate more local education when like you're funded by the state and you have because you have to do what the state wants. Yeah. Well, and even probably an even better example is like this happens in Mexico too with indigenous communities. You have like teachers who often you've had teachers who enter like indigenous villages like Mixtec or Zapotec villages, and people speak a native language there. The instructor though they're trained in a teachers college, which is very like Hispanocentric, and they re-enter these villages having to force students to speak Spanish, and sometimes they use like very violent methods to do that, unfortunately. So that's just another manifestation of that. Like it's usually educate a lot of the times like state funded education is counter to the preservation of like local culture. Yeah, definitely for indigenous cultures. Yeah. So that just rings true. Like it is definitely a dehumanization process there.
And I would say, I don't know if the article used the term moderate, like saying like politically moderate teachers were doing this, but I would say in my experience, I've even seen like teachers who would call themselves, left or liberal or whatever part of the political spectrum they're on. Like, I think I've seen that perpetuation or that like the perpetuation of like oppressive schooling methods happen because they are so ingrained in us that we don't even realize.
Yeah.
Right? We don't even realize that we are acting in a way that is suppressing students' creativity or knowledge or just ability to express themselves. Even in, even the whole debate around like school uniforms.
Yeah.
Right. And to what degree they've become so strict in some charter schools, right? Like they're micromanaging like the color of socks students wear and just kind of the impact that has on the student, the relationship of like the institution with the community and the families. But I definitely think that happens a lot. It's really difficult to work within the school system and not have to fall into line yourself sometimes.
Yeah. It kind of reminded me of what we talked about in the last pod, and I hate to bring him up again, Jeff Duncan Andrade. Like, the school, I feel like we keep roasting him, and we're probably going to get in trouble, but I don't really care. But because, the roses that grew from the concrete school, I know.
Did they get closed down after all?
I don't know, but because one of the podcasters that was here last time, he was saying that what he heard was like people are just overworked there, like the teachers and the staff, and
I know CCSA was recommending for them to be shut down, which is a really big deal because they never recommend a charter school to be shut down. So like if the Charter School Association says that, it's kind of like it's probably going to happen. I think they were up for renewal this year. I think this was year 5.
Do you know what the reason was for the shutting it down?
Data.
Oh, okay. Like not enough like high test scores?
Not enough high test scores. And I guess the way it was explained to me was that because I asked, well, like charter schools all over the place have really shitty test scores. Like, why would the recommendation be made for this particular school? And it was like, well, whenever a charter school is underperforming, we asked like for triangular data. So we asked for other data, and they were already anticipating that Duncan was going to be like, fuck off, I'm not going to give you. Now, I don't know if that actually happened, if he didn't want to provide more data, or I don't know. I'm not sure what happened. I know last time I heard him speak, his big thing was about like, we're collecting the wrong data. So who knows, maybe he didn't want to provide them data, but I know it wasn't looking good for that school to stay open.
Yeah.
Neoliberal. Hillary's counterpart, Mr. Andrade. He does it well. He has all the right parts. He speaks the thing. He has this rhetoric, but he doesn't have the test scores. And I think the reason is that there is a schizophrenia in the current liberal party, which is if you go that route, which is like you sort of like speak that left rhetoric, but then in practice you have to do something else, and then you get caught up in all that mush that is happening sort of like in his head cognitively. I think that's why he's getting into all this conflict. He's just not honest with himself, he can't have doublethink going on and have a serious school performance. It's not going to happen. But I think that kind of goes back to the idea of like, what do we do in the classroom? And you know, Rebecca, you talked about this at the very beginning of this conversation about like, there's this sense that the content is not being covered. And it's that fine line between like, what does count? What actually does count in a good education? You know, what my students are saying recently is they're saying, because the content is actually not difficult, they're saying, I don't know how to manage my time and I'm lonely. And those are the biggest barriers, at least from sort of West Oakland High School to Oakland International newcomer high school population.
I had a handful of students tell me from the UCs that their professors are absolutely like over the standardized form in which they were taught to write. So all of the, I've probably heard them all, like all the paragraph formations and all of those scaffolds that we use to try to help students write essays. I got a lot of feedback on that. I'm like,
yeah, Cal professors hate it.
Mm-hmm.
At least at that university. It's like we always do it wrong. We're like a bunch of goofs. And we like pretend like we know what we're saying. It's like, do this thing. And then they go there and like, they're like, what the why'd you tell me to do that? Fucking idiot, you got me a D. I did it my way and I got a B or something. It's like,
yeah, that kind of,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, it just kind of reminds me of this like whole idea of like, the student population that we're teaching may not have like parents proofreading their essays and ensuring that they have like a fluid transitions and like their writing is not pretty. And I remember growing up and I didn't really have that in my household. I had to kind of learn it all on my own and also like maybe ask for like advocate for help. Right. And like a lot of the folks that did help me had just happened to be white and be native English speakers. And what I think is really interesting is that like, I think a lot of college professors don't understand the changing demographics of the California high school graduate like profile. They are in this like mindset that like high school should prepare students to be college ready. But what they don't understand is that a lot of our students have like, I'm trying, I guess like I'm trying to avoid like a deficit perspective, but it's like the way they've been trained to like learn how to write is a product of like the California public educational system that teaches towards the middle, which is we need to get as many kids passing our classes as possible. And if that includes using these boring ass scaffolds that don't necessarily like create like a very like an interesting way of writing, then you know, the schools are going to be in trouble, right? Like at the high school level, because we're not going to have like as many kids graduate, because if we hold them to a college standards, right, it's like it's going to be tough. And I don't know, I just think there's a huge disconnect, and I think that a lot of college professors want to teach toward a particular student in mind, and it's not our kids' fault that they've been in classrooms where mediocrity is the thing that we teach, and that is the thing that we need to teach in order to not lose our jobs because we're failing too many kids.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. Like, I think these college professors just need to get punched in the face, right? And be like, yeah, well, you know, guess what? You got to actually be a good teacher, and then like teach fucking kids how to write, motherfucker. Like, I want to say that to them, every single one of them, and just be like, not everybody's like you. Not everybody, like the graduate profile has shifted since your privileged ass went to high school, and fucking deal with it. You know, that's kind of what I want to say.
Makes me think of what Daniel mentioned earlier about like ability to think or critical thinking. Like, good writing is often like one of the precursors to being able to write interestingly or fluidly, is being able to have that thought process be clear in your mind and you be able to understand what it is that you want to say. I think a lot of times we try to create systems that are going to like produce what we think we want students to do without actually giving students what they truly need to be able to do that, right? Like giving them space to have discourse and that freedom. We want our students to be like critical thinkers and good writers, but we don't want to afford them kind of like that intellectual freedom that they need to truly be able to do that. So we kind of like supplement it or say, hey, as long as you follow these steps, you're going to be good, right? You're going to produce like what needs to be produced. But just like you mentioned, it is most definitely middle ground, like mediocre work. And we praise it as like A-level work.
Mm-hmm.
And then our students leave us oftentimes with like a misconception of their abilities at that point or their capacity at that point.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons for that is, at least at the school level, most of the time people are actually not talking about instruction. Like what is instruction? How does it work?
Yes.
It's usually based on other things. And so if we get paid money to do the thing that we never talk about, like that is a very strange operation. I don't know of any other profession or like things that take themselves seriously in which the time spent on the thing you're supposed to do is not spent at all. And I think that's ludicrous in America. And I think that's why it kind of operates that way. Even at the college level, they don't even care about like instruction. They're like, fuck it, I'll just profess, and then you'll just absorb this knowledge, right? So we just don't care about the like pedagogy in this country. It's not a value that we hold. We hold the values of like capitalism. We have freedom. We want to be male. We want to do this, but not about that other thing.
I was once part of these conversations that was really, really interesting, and I've never really seen this come up again. But they were advocating, it was like a group of educators advocating that teacher unions needed to shift in the direction of being professional associations rather than like labor entities. But one of their arguments, and it was a very heated and diverse in opinions space, but one of the arguments was that we very much are still kind of in the space of like a labor movement, and we don't pay attention to like the profession and the art of the profession, and we don't advocate or have spaces to advocate for like professional development. The fact that like teachers rarely get to like experience conferences or being able to like connect with other educators across the country, and rarely do you have spaces that advocate for like teachers staying abreast of the current research and pedagogy or learning. Like those things are so absent in a lot of our schools.
Yeah, it really does kind of remind me like that of this idea that like teachers are kind of like dentists. We just kind of get taught that one way and then we replicate it over and over. And as long as the kids don't complain too much, like we keep doing the same thing again and again and again, because like we don't have the professional capacity to like learn other things. We're in survival mode all the time. Like every day is going to be kind of hard because like crazy shit's going to happen in the classroom, right? And so it's weird, like kind of like Daniel was saying, like we don't really talk about pedagogy when we meet as educators. Like what we do is we talk about everything else. And I think maybe I'm starting to think that this is not an issue just on my school site, but PD is just called is a staff meeting, and it's never actual professional development. Please tell me I'm wrong. Takashi, Rebecca, Daniel.
No, I know that's the biggest concern I've heard from, educators in my circle. And that's definitely something I've tried my best to shift at the school that I'm currently at right now. But I think that also has to do with the culture about who becomes administrators and the people that become administrators. Because I know, like the founder of the school that I'm at, which outranks me, right? So he's going to have that positional authority to make decisions. His experience doesn't necessarily make him someone who can truly engage in like pedagogical professional development or truly understand what's happening. So no, I agree with you. I think a lot of PD, unfortunately, is not actually developing the profession.
Yeah, it's like, that sucks. Kind of goes back to the whole like neoliberal thing. It's like, it's the it's the Hillary Clintons that are the ones running the schools, because those are the skill sets and the lingo that get prized in the funding circles, right? So it's like, awesome, more Hillary Clinton, you know.
A lot of times what gets focused is the results, not really about the process. Like the school looks at like this, you know, like the charter network or district or nationwide, they look at the test scores. Oh, which school has the highest test score? Which school has the highest graduation rate? Which schools are getting more students into the university system? It's more about the results, but there's never focus on the process, like what's happening in between. And I was looking at this data of this trend of like students failing rate and like, you know, students getting like a 4.0 or A. It has dramatically increased over the years. And part of the reason is teachers or schools in general are afraid to fail their students. I know there was like a controversy of certain schools in DC where, you know, it was low income, mostly Black students. 100% of them got into like a 4-year university, and they did an investigation, and like majority of those students didn't even attend the school, or like they were like absent most of the time. It's like, how can you have so many absences and still get into these universities or get, you know, really high GPAs? And they found out that the admins were making the numbers up or whatever. And it happened more than one schools. And this is like a consistent theme that has been going on recently over the years. And, you know, we talk about like students getting the mediocre work or mediocre stuff in high school, and then when they get to college, you know, they don't feel equipped or ready. And, you know, that kind of perpetuates that cycle. Just kind of, here, you know, we're afraid to fail you. We don't want to get sued by the parents. We don't want to look bad. We don't want our school to look bad. So, you know, we're just going to pass you and you'll go on to college.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the whole because of COVID-19, let's give every kid an A argument that that kind of exposes like the sheer ridiculousness of grading systems in general. Yeah, it just, you know, like for me, I think like that particular group of educators in DC, I think that they embraced that wholeheartedly, and they were like, you know what, like if this is a white supremacist institution and it's not built for our kids, why don't we just go ahead and throw our graduates wherever they want to go and then see what happens, right? Because if it's true that even at the Ivy Leagues, the vast majority of the work is like pretty mediocre, then like why shouldn't we give our kids a chance to like produce mediocre work in these high level institutions? I'm okay with that, actually. I'm absolutely okay with fudging the numbers, playing dirty to get kids competitive with upper middle class folks who are actually pretty boring and shitty and not the kind of people I want to hang out with, right? Like I think that's absolutely, like, it's a valid playbook. It's like kind of a cutthroat playbook, but I don't like it's problematic as that is. I kind of sympathize with the educators that have perpetuated that particular educational fraud on behalf of their students, and probably for their own benefit as well. But like, you know, I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say like, maybe they did it for their kids, not for their own fucking paychecks.
It's the equivalent of our trust fund for our kids. Here's how I write a check. But that just goes back to, it's almost like that, the fact that we even have to have that argument or try to figure out whether or not we're okay with that is like, it's like one of the symptoms of that bigger problem. And we never get to that underlying problem, right? Which is like, I would say in my experience, the reason like Fs became so controversial is because people started, you know, acknowledging the products of inequity and realizing like, okay, wait a minute, we have to make sure that our students are getting what they need. And inadvertently that somehow became like, or the way I've seen it played out is like, if you're failing a lot of kids, there must be something wrong in your class. Right. And so then teachers kind of started internalizing that. And they're like, well, wait a minute, I don't want to be the teacher that's failing a lot of kids, because then maybe something's wrong in my class, or I'm not being fair, I'm not giving enough chances. And it kind of spiraled. And in that entire conversation, we're still not addressing those fundamental issues that are even producing like the conditions that require us to make sure our kids have what they need. You know, so it's just frustrating. I think a lot of times in educational conversations, we're just barely getting at the, like, trimming the leaves of this plant, right? And we're not ever really getting to the root.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of this issue that I saw a lot when I was teaching English in Japan a long time ago. There is this, like, because we're so product oriented, there's no real space for reflection. And I remember that, like, I was teaching in a rural middle school in Japan, and there was like the kids that, like, failed, like, if a kid failed in a school like that, there was always, like, some sort of reflective element. But we're so punitive and product focused that, like, if we fail a kid, like, there are, like, immediate, like, negative consequences. And, like, I honestly think, like, an F is probably the best way to learn, but because the way the society is structured, like, an F is like a death sentence for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And I feel that, like, without the space for reflection and without a space for growth, we're not teaching kids how to fail productively. And I think that's actually a huge danger.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, again, that's, like, it's another conversation around grading altogether. But I think it kind of, like, flows into the whole, like, neoliberal paradigm of we're so product focused. We're so laissez-faire that, like, we cannot like failure is just failure. It just means you suck, you know. And I think that's kind of a terrible way to structure an educational system without any space for reflection. Because I do fail kids, and I don't feel good about it. But, like, the fact that I, like, there isn't, like, a conference afterwards. There's no structured conference where I could be like, hey, you failed. Let's talk about it, right? Like, there's no place for reflection built within the school schedule. To me, that's, like, a huge disservice, and it's not gonna promote any sort of growth. It just means that, like, well, an F means that you don't get credit. That's all it means, and you're either going to go to credit recovery, you're going to have to take summer school, or go to a continuation school to get your high school diploma, right? I don't know. Just, like, that process to me seems very inhuman, and I don't know. I would like to create some sort of a structure that allows for reflection and growth, but we're product oriented. We care about graduation rates. We care about who gets into college, right? Like, we don't really care about learning. We just care about, like, we care about the end product of education, which is human capital economic growth. That's it.
Have y'all read a book called Mindsets by Carol Dweck? Usually what you just described remind me of that. So she talks about two mindsets, right? Fixed mindset and growth mindset. And a lot of the students, and I feel like this culture is really fixed mindset oriented, where it's like you get an F, so you're like, oh, I'm a failure. I'm not good at math. I'm never going to get good at it. It's like inherently, like, I'm just not going to be good at something. Or, like, I believe in natural ability or talent. But on the other hand, like, students or people that have a growth mindset tend to have more about, like, okay, it's okay to fail. If I fail at it, I can learn from it. It's more about, like, the challenge and the learning process rather than the end results. And people with fixed mindset focus more on the results and focus on not failing. And, that creates more anxiety, and that creates more, like, issues and problems in the long run. But folks with growth mindset take on the challenges and just kind of develop by making mistakes and giving it a try. And usually, like, folks with growth mindset tend to outperform the students with fixed mindset, since their view of ability is different from the other students. Do y'all have any last thoughts?
Yuji and I have to get going, but, like, final thoughts. I appreciate the space for the conversations that we had today. I had no idea where we were going to go, but it was a cool journey, and appreciate people's times and the thinking that goes into the space like this. It's not an everyday or an every week group, so it's cool to connect during these times.
Yeah, likewise. I really appreciated the space. It's complex content, it's scary to talk about openly sometimes. But I think through dialogue, it furthers our understanding of just educational issues, period. But I know it's helpful for me as well to process and further understand, like, myself and where I stand and what I think and believe.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys for inviting me to this space. This is it's been fun chatting it up, and it's a good way to kind of process at least a lot of the disparate thoughts that kind of seep into your brain as you do this like dumb ass thing called distance learning, or at least facilitating that. And because a lot of times I'm like, I'll put up an assignment like, no one's gonna do this. This is stupid. Why did I even do this? But like this is a great avenue to at least like verbalize like the weird, strange thoughts that I do have. So thank you very much for hosting.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. I don't know, for me, I just like it. I just like to have different people just like meet each other, you know. I think that's where my joy comes from.
I learned a lot.
All right, everybody. Take care of yourselves.
All right. Bye, Daniel. Bye,
See you.
Eugene.
Nice to meet everyone.
All right,
See ya.
you.